Welcome to Lunch and Learn with Industry. Today's talk is An Unexpected Journey and Why You Should Care by Jon Campbell from Microsoft.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a few opening comments and I'll introduce our speaker for today. My name is Greg Zweigle. I am not the speaker for today, but I really want to share with you quickly why we're doing this Lunch and Learn series and what this is all about. So I work as an engineer at Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories right here in Pullman, and I'm on what's called the WSU EECS Executive Council, as is Jon Campbell, who is our speaker today. This council consists of about 25 engineers, managers, executives, mostly on the West Coast, and really what our purpose is to advocate for the WSU program for all of you, really, at our companies and within the industry, and we also give advice to WSU, really to help WSU just with making sure that they're teaching skills and values that we need in industry. When we on the Executive Council learned about the move to online for the fall, we realized that this could be an opportunity to find another way to connect with, to connect you with industry. And, you know, since we all have Zoom now. And I remember when I was a student, I really had only the vaguest idea of what my career would look like, what a high-tech job looked like. So we really want to take this opportunity to share with you those kinds of things. So what we're planning on doing with this series is bringing a bunch of experts from industry to share with you career experiences and how to succeed in industry, what to expect with your first job, interviewing advice, along with technology discussions and trends. And, you know, maybe you'll hear of a job opportunity through this series. So you might be getting tired of Zoom meetings, but hopefully you will find this Lunch and Learn valuable. We're going to try to schedule one for every other Friday is the pace we're looking at. And I've got a really great list of speakers lined up, okay? So I'm really excited about this series, and I hope you are too. So what I want to do now is introduce our speaker for today. This is Jon Campbell. He spent about 6 years in Pullman. He earned a double major, Bachelor in Computer Science and a Bachelor in Computer Engineering, and a double minor, one in Math and one in Electrical Engineering. And these are in 2003, and then he has a Master of Science, Computer Science in 2005. So Jon had internships at Sandia National Laboratories, at startups, and since he graduated from Washington State, he spent about 15 years at Microsoft in a lot of divisions such as Office, Xbox, Windows, and now at Microsoft Research, which to me sounds really interesting. And he works in the area of accessibility technology. So some of the other things Jon's done that he listed, which I thought were kind of cool, is he won the Microsoft One Week Hackathon in 2014, and he won, this is interesting, Jon, I'm really curious about this, maybe I'll ask you about this afterwards, but the South by Southwest 2018 Music and Audio Innovation Award, which sounds cool. Okay, so here's how this Lunch and Learn is going to work, all right? So we've got a really large audience, so we just started you all out muted, sorry. And I don't think you can unmute, but we want to have a good Q&A time. So when Jon is finished, if you have questions, use the chat, all right? And in the future, depending how things go, we might open it up for audio Q&A. But definitely ask questions. I think that'll be the most fun part. And it's also a great way to, you know, try some networking with these various speakers who could be hiring someday. This meeting is recorded, and so we need to work out the details, but hopefully we can make this recording available. If you have friends that missed this and are interested to hear more from Jon, you can let them know, and we'll try to find a way to make that available. And then one more thing I want to say before we start. I'm a longtime Pullman resident, and for those of you that are in Pullman, I really want to say I'm glad you're here, okay? And for those of you that aren't able to be here this semester, of course, I understand, we all understand, but we really look forward to when we can all come back to Pullman and have school like normal because, you know, this town's just not the same without everybody here. Okay, so with that comment, I'm going to turn this over to Jon.
Thanks, Greg. So, as mentioned, I'm Jon Campbell. I'm a senior software development engineer in Microsoft Research Enable Group. I'm assuming I'm supposed to put one of these slides up, which basically says anything I say, blame me. Don't blame my boss. Don't blame, you know, Microsoft or anything like that. I'm going to try not to offend anybody, and I'll try to be very honest, like I always am with students. But you know, Try not to offend anybody, of course. And then the other thing is, of course, any images I use, I straight up grabbed them off the internet. So they're copyrights of all the respective owners and that sort of stuff. So as kind of mentioned, I wear a lot of hats. I've got a family, so I met my wife in Pullman. And so we've been married for 15 years now. And I've got 2 kids and a dog. So I spend a lot of time trying to get my family. So I'm going to keep it, work hard to do that. I've got my work at Microsoft. I run a nonprofit karate school on the side. So, especially in these times, it's really challenging, especially running a full contact karate dojo where normally we hit each other. So especially challenging right now. I'm super deep into scouts. So I'm an Eagle Scout and I'm a assistant Cub Master and den leader for my son and daughter's Cub Scout pack. Done like wood badge training, if any of you kind of know about what that is. So there's all kinds of interesting, crossovers with work life and personal life and scout life and that sort of thing. As Greg also mentioned, I'm on the EECS Executive Council. I've done a bunch of recruiting with WSU, all kinds of stuff. Sponsoring senior design projects. I actually see, I think, 1 or 2 people from a senior design project that I'm sponsoring. So that's all good. And of course, hobbies. I love, woodworking, photography, electronics, all that sort of stuff. So the title of today's talk is Accessibility, an Unexpected Journey, and Why You Should Care, right? So hopefully it'll be sort of insightful and entertaining in certain ways. The long and the short of it is I'm going to try to share, how I ended up at accessibility, because it's not exactly a straight line. Some of the important learnings that I've learned once I got into the accessibility field. Hopefully some hopeful notes along the way that kind of like the other speakers are talking about, kind of general career advice. So even if you don't like accessibility stuff, hopefully there's some nuggets along the way that you'll find useful. By the end, I'd like to convince you that you should care about accessibility, because a lot of times, people don't. And then I really, hope for a nice, robust Q&A session at the end. So that's the plan. As mentioned, I spent 6 years in Pullman, and normally when people think about 6 years in Pullman's a party school, UWSU is, so they think, woo, party plan, right? 6 years, must have been an awesome time. And, then usually I try to let them down easy and be like, no, it was more like Revenge of the Nerds style. So yeah, double major, double minor, and then a master's degree. The master's degree was partly because the economy tanked. And so the best thing to do was stay in school, right? And that's actually, your first bit of career advice. If the job market sucks, staying in school can be really useful, because the student hiring channels for many corporations are a little bit different than the ones for people who have been out of school. Therefore, you're an industry hire, and that's a pretty high bar. So sometimes going back to school for a little bit can be really helpful. So just something to keep in mind. In that same time period, I went from never having done karate to a 3rd degree black belt, and that might seem fast, but I was also doing karate 6 days a week, teaching classes, all that sort of stuff. So I was pretty focused during that time. So like many of you, I would have thought like, geez, my resume is pretty awesome. I've got all this cool stuff. I've got, sort of leadership accolades. I've worked hard. I've got sort of personal achievements. I've got the hardware, software background that should be able to really put me in a solid position. So I should have like all these job offers. And so I applied to places. I applied to TiVo, I applied to Microsoft, I applied to, all over, and I got denied, right? And so like specifically with Microsoft, just as one example, I got denied not once, not twice, not 3 times. I got denied 11 times. So I applied to Microsoft every single semester my entire time at WSU. And all but one time, I didn't even make it to an on-campus meeting, at Microsoft interview. I got a couple like, initial interviews in Pullman, but never was able to get all the way to the Microsoft campus to get an interview. I never got an internship with them. But you're saying to yourself, wait a second, you said you do work for Microsoft. The answer is yes. Yes. I got one approval, right? I finally, after getting some good internships under my belt and polishing my resume and trying to be focused about what I was looking for, I got approved, right? And so I think the salient point, the Japanese characters in the middle here, they're sort of important to my karate background as well. It says, usno session, which refers to pushing with perseverance. And, put another way for this context, it really means just don't give up, right? Like you got to keep working. You got to keep working. It doesn't mean work in a non-smart way. You have to be able to adjust. You have to be able to rethink what you're trying to do in terms of approach, but keep working at it, because if you really have perseverance, you can be successful in what you're trying to do. So especially in times like this, don't give up. Don't give up. Like, you got to adapt, but don't give up. So, I mean, a Microsoft job, that's kind of a dream job, right? Well, so I had sort of mixed feelings in certain ways, right? And really, I've met a lot of college hires that have had similar mixed feelings. They're like, I like the idea of working at, you know, a Google, a Facebook, a Microsoft, an Apple, or whatever, but I'm not necessarily super enthusiastic about the team that wants to hire me, right? Because they're, you know, counting toilet paper or whatever. And that was kind of the same way for me. Like, was I excited about working at Microsoft? Yeah, like it was a great job. The economy was, you know, bad. So having a nice, solid, you know, place to start my career was great. The way that especially Office worked at that time, it was really good about bringing in new engineers, training them how to be great engineers. So, you know, spending those first 3 to 5 years of your career there and really getting solid engineering chops was a great choice. So I worked on Front Page and eventually SharePoint. So, you know, most job listings, when you look, I remember in college, I looked and I said like, oh, geez, they all want 3 to 5 years experience. How do I get 3 to 5 years experience if I don't have 3 to 5 years experience, right? So starting at a place like Microsoft was a really great opportunity for that for me, because it, you know, checked that box. Like, okay, I've been in the industry for a couple of years. I have a good idea of how to ship stuff. We built stuff for 100 million users, and that's super cool. Like the concept of, you know, building stuff on the scale of like, you know, 10% or 1% of the entire planet is pretty cool, right? That scale is amazing. But the kind of the sucky thing is I'd never really met anybody who was like super excited to use SharePoint. Like all of you, you know, probably touch SharePoint in various ways. You don't realize it. And that was kind of the same way. So it puts a damper on like, yeah, lots of people use it, but you know, nobody's necessarily excited about it, at least at that time. And so I stayed there for 7.5 years. And I think the salient thing for you in terms of career advice is I think 7.5 years was probably about 2.5 years too long. You know, it worked out okay. I was advancing my career at the time. I thought I was going to be a lead. And in the end, it was just like, you know what? You're like that one person who hangs out in the dorms like 1 year too long rather than getting your own apartment. Like there's nothing wrong with that, but it's like, it doesn't feel quite right anymore. And since I wasn't really like gung-ho to get a lead position at that point, I just had kids, you know, my priorities have changed a little bit. You know, it was time to make a change. And so being able to recognize when it's time to pivot is really important. And the big question is okay, pivot, right? Pivot, make a change. The great thing about working in a larger corporation like a Microsoft, an Apple, a Facebook, any of these places, is that you can pivot within the corporation. And that's nice. It feels safe. You don't have to go through tons of interview processes. You can stay living in your same house and keep your same health plan, all that sort of stuff. So pivoting can be really valuable in that situation early in your career. Do something different, but at the same level. But the big question is how do you pivot? And, you know, I think, you know, I sat there for a long time, like, how do I do this? Like people say, just like, you know, pivot, just make a change. It's like, how do you choose? And honestly, the best thing that happened to me was I got an email from one of my former bosses, and really it was an aspect of, you know, your social network engaging, right? So one of my former bosses had moved on, and he was still within Microsoft. He is now over in a different team. And he was like, hey, do you want to come work for me again? And I, you know, thought about it for a little bit, and I was like, Xbox? Yes, please, right? And so I think that's a thing, like trying to keep in contact with your, you know, former managers and former colleagues is a valuable thing, because you never know when they have a opportunity that they're going to bring you. And that's a really powerful tool. In school as an engineer, and even in my early career as an engineer, I sat there and I was like, networking is a bunch of like, you know, old dudes playing golf and shaking hands and chuckling over scotch or something like that. Like, that's not what engineers do. And in fact, even my peers at Microsoft were like, no, like you prove yourself through your code. And to some degree, that's true. Like you prove yourself through your work. but at the same time, like cultivating the right people that see your good work, but also are in different parts of the company is an extremely valuable tool. So it is something that I would encourage you to consider. It's something that I never thought I would need, but it's been invaluable now. So I moved on to the Xbox One launch team. And the reason I have this sort of Old West logo here is that's really what it felt like. So Office is this massive beast, and it's like an aircraft carrier and all the battle fleet that goes around it, and you move in coordination, and at that time you'd ship every 3 years on time, plus or minus 6 months, and like that's an effort. And so the way they do it is with military-like precision. But when you go to Xbox, it was like this entirely different company that just happened to have the same health plan. So we're sitting there, and you're having hallway conversations, and people are saying like, "Hey, that thing that we talked about in the hallway, is it done yet?" I'm like, "Wait, isn't there a spec?" and all this sort of stuff. So being able to be adaptable to a new team culture is really important. So that was a really important learning. And the other really big thing with gaming, especially, they always say you can't move Christmas. And really what that comes down to is they are schedule driven, right? So being on the launch team for shipping Xbox One is very similar to what the team is doing right now with the Xbox Series X, is that it's like you're building the plane while you're trying to land it. And it's a little bit different than like an individual game. Like you're building the platform. So the game developers are also trying to develop their games on beta versions of your hardware and your software. So it really is this massive coordinated effort. And it was probably one of the most intense in terms of work, the most intense times of my career. And it was really rewarding. And one of the cool things is that, I had tens of millions of users now. So I went down by a factor of 10 in terms of the number of users that I was, touching. But at the same time, those users really, really love the product. And I love the product too. I love video games. You can see in the background, I've got, some cool posters of video games on the wall and stuff. Like, I love video games, and a lot of other people do too. So that was a really rewarding thing, even though I was affecting less people. And put another way, like my hypothesis is that there are way more Xbox tattoos on people's arms and legs and backs than there are SharePoint tattoos. So that's got to stay something. So I'm in Xbox and eventually Windows, and then things kind of like they're going okay, like things are going great. And then all of a sudden, this weird storm happened all at once, and it was something totally unexpected, so totally serendipitous. And really, what it was is it was all these little connections that I had sort of cultivated over the years, all of a sudden came together at once. And so, what you see here is like, there's Steve Gleason up in the upper left-hand corner. So he played for the Cougars when I was in Pullman, and they went to the Rose Bowl and that sort of stuff. My connections with WSU on the executive committee and also sponsoring senior design projects, my work on the Connect, and some of the, sort of like science projects, sort of explorations that I liked to do. I always like to keep tinkering on the technology that I was messing with and seeing what it could do beyond my normal job. Viewridge Elementary School is up here because when I was in elementary school, I was in the high cap program, and the school that I went to, they labeled themselves as 3 schools in 1. And what that meant was they had high cap, they had sort of the traditional mainstream students, and then that was the school in the Everett School District that had the complex rehab, the special ed program, but not like the sort of typical special ed. Like we had a therapy pool, we had an apartment in the school, we had like a mock grocery store where people could learn to stock shelves. So, I was exposed in an early age to, some of this accessibility stuff. And I never really thought a lot about it, but it never, for lack of a better term, bothered me. Right. And that, at the time, growing up in the, the 80s and 90s, like that was, abnormal to just be like, oh yeah, there's kids in wheelchairs in the school, and, we interacted with them in various ways. And it was just like, yeah, that's a normal thing. So, I never thought it would be my career at the time, but it kind of stuck with me. And, I had a couple friends in middle school and high school. Their dad had ALS, so we sort of watched that progression from afar. But again, it was one of those like, that's really too bad. But okay, I kind of get how this is working. But whatever. I've got my, I'm counting rolls of toilet paper in SharePoint land or working on Xbox, all full steam ahead. And then you've got the Ice Bucket Challenge that happened to happen in 2014 as well during that summer. And so all that came together in this weird confluence, and all of a sudden I found myself involved with this hackathon team. And I actually didn't even plan on doing the hackathon. It was one of those things that just sort of like happens. Like I got invited to a meeting. I was talking about the Connect stuff. The meeting went terribly. Like they were just like, no, what you're talking about just doesn't fit with what we want. Kind of walking away from the meeting with a tail between my legs sort of thing. And then at the very end of the meeting, I looked at this list of priorities they had. And one of the things at the very bottom is said, like, we want to be able to drive a wheelchair with your eyes. And I was like, I bet I could figure out how to do that. And so I, after the meeting, sketched out on the whiteboard, like this quick sketch of here's how you could drive a wheelchair with your eyes. And here's how the Connect could be involved and all that. And so all of a sudden, like, they were like, yeah, you should join this hackathon team. And I was like, okay, cool. I don't know anything about ALS. I don't know anything about eye tracking. I got here through a series of bizarre connections, but hey, let's ride this out. Let's see what happens. And what happens was that we won, like, not just like, some little small consolation prize, like we won the whole thing. It was weird, right? So like we're sitting there and it really was because we worked with Steve. And it's not about one person, but that was the initial way of understanding, like, you have to focus on one person, because if you focus on this too ephemeral of a concept, then you lose sight of actually helping anybody. If you don't help one person, you help nobody more than you help lots of people. So we worked very intensely with Steve. We worked on specifically addressing, I like to call it his manifesto. It wasn't, some sort of creepy thing. It was just an email that had a list of like things that he wanted done. And so we worked intensely on trying to figure out like how to address those needs. And it really was serendipitous in that sense. We worked hard, we got the right people involved, and we were able to get some stuff done, and winning was pretty cool, right? And I was lucky enough to be, one of the two dudes that got to dump a bunch of water on top of my CEO, who can, quite literally buy and sell me. So the net of that, you'd think like, okay, you won the hackathon. It was all this great stuff, 15,000 employees and thousands of projects and all this. So like champagne's going to rain from the heavens and all this sort of stuff. And the answer is no, right? I got a jacket, and the jacket wasn't even so unique. Like the jacket had a little tiny toggle that said winner. But otherwise, the jacket was the same one as a bunch of other, winners had gotten. But what we did get is we get the opportunity to sit down with Satya and kind of pitch. And when we went in and pitched, it was actually super weird. We walked in, and some of the people in the room that I'd never met or seen before were like, "Hey, we're spinning up a team." And Satya was like, "Yeah, that's right. You're spinning up a team. How's that going to go?" And all of a sudden, we had to modify this pitch we're trying to do. And so, don't assume that just because you win a hackathon that like things are going to all of a sudden change. They don't. But it turns out that one of the people in this photo, actually, the blonde on the right side of my screen, she kept telling me like, "Hey, there's that new team, John. You should consider applying." And I kept saying, "Oh no, it's all right. Like I got a good thing going. I'm really working hard on my career." And then she kept mentioning, "John, I think you should apply." And eventually I realized, oh, they're trying to recruit me for this team. They just can't like poach people, right? And so I was like, okay, I get it. Yeah, I'm going to apply to this team. And so I do have the dubious honor of being the one lucky schmuck that got to make it my full-time job. And so while it wasn't a clear path from like, joining Microsoft or even like winning the hackathon to being able to do accessibility and sort of hacking and making as my full-time job, it did happen, and it can happen. You just have to sort of be aware of your surroundings and sort of, crafty about how you navigate that. So, okay, so I work in accessibility now. What now, right? So the biggest thing we had to do is really spin up quickly on what are the first principles of accessibility. And the first thing to really think about is accessibility is a contact sport. And what I mean by that is that you can't say, oh, those people, right? Those people act like this, or these people have certain behaviors, or these people have certain needs. you have to really go meet people. And that was, remember earlier I was saying in SharePoint, right? I served 100 million users and I'd never met any of them. That always felt kind of gross to me, right? Some people are okay with that, and that's fine. But for me, it always felt like this doesn't feel right. So all of a sudden, this was the first time where it was like, as a developer, I get to interact with real people with real problems and solve their problems more directly. So that felt really, really good and sort of really right. It was finally scratching that itch. But the thing to know about it is that if you've met one person with a disability, you've met exactly one person. And if you've met nobody with an accessibility, one, you aren't looking. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Two, you shouldn't call yourself an accessibility engineer because you're not. You're a developer that's trying to make stuff for random people and you're labeling it as accessibility. And really, three, you're doing it wrong, right? You have to figure out how to meet people. And that's a really big difference because in a lot of ways, people think that user-driven development is all about like looking at statistics and telemetry and saying like, oh, our cohort analysis says that we're 30% better at getting people to buy our widgets. And that's important. Like those are important things. But you can't substitute that, especially in accessibility, for meeting real people and talking to real people and assessing their needs more directly. So one thing I want to make absolutely clear is the definition of disability, because this is something that I didn't really realize. So one thing you've probably heard me doing, or at least attempting to do, is use person-first language. They're a person living with ALS. They're a person, who is blind, that sort of thing. And that really is driven out of this more modern take on what disability means. So in the 1980s, 1990s, and even before that, the prevalent sort of concept around disability was a thing about you that makes you not able to do stuff, right? And that's not a good definition, but it's kind of a hand-wavy one. And so this image here of a person in a wheelchair in front of stairs is a common example, right? It's like he can't go to the top of where he's trying to go because he's in a wheelchair, right? And his wheelchair can't climb stairs. So that's putting the onus on that person as an individual. And perhaps what's wrong with him, but that's not really an accurate definition. If we look at the more modern definition, it's a mismatch between your environment and your capabilities, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But put it another way, like if you look at the gentleman in the wheelchair in this picture again, it's saying he doesn't have the right tools to be successful, right? So if there was a ramp there, he would be able to get up to the top just fine, right? So it's not that his wheelchair is preventing him from getting to the top. It's that there aren't the proper affordances available at that time. And when you broaden that definition to something I think a little more accurate, that's where you say, okay, affordances make way more sense, right? It's not something for others. So when you're on a small team, one of the really key things that we had to learn is you have to focus. You have to focus because if you're on a team of 3, 4, or 5 people and you have these really ambitious goals, you can get so stuck trying to do everything, so much so that you'll do nothing, like analysis paralysis. And so our team did exactly that. We really focused. And what we said is we're going to focus on ALS. And we're going to focus on ALS not because we don't care about other diseases. Of course, we care about Parkinson's. I've got an uncle with Parkinson's. We care about breast cancer, right? I've met people with breast cancer before, right? We care about cerebral palsy. We care about all these different things. But in order to be successful, we have to pick something that we can focus on. And what we chose to focus on was people living with ALS that were cognitively intact, which is a decent number of people living with ALS, and those that are looking to use technology as a means to provide them more capabilities. And yes, Steve was one of those focal points, but we also knew that we can't focus just on Steve because Steve is really kind of a 1%er of ALS, right? He's got great support. He's a smart guy. I like to think of him, sort of, he trained himself professionally for the NFL and to play on, collegiate football. So I like to think that he took those same attitudes of training himself for ALS. He saw it coming, he trained himself, and he was, as prepared as anybody could be. So we really focused. We said, let's focus, and let's not just focus on ALS, but let's really focus on 2 primary areas. And these primary areas were driven by those original emails that Steve sent. And again, we're not targeting just Steve, but it's good to have that muse of like, are we solving the problems of the people that we're trying to solve them for? And so the two main areas we focused on were independent mobility and natural communication. So independent mobility really comes down to eye gaze driving of a wheelchair. And the thing about that is you notice that I labeled it as independent mobility, not eye gaze driving wheelchairs. And that's because when you think about accessibility, one of the things you need to do is step back and say, it's about the task that they're trying to achieve. Technology is a mechanism to get you there. And so you don't want to mistake the technology as the end goal versus technology as the mechanism. So eye gaze driving a wheelchair is the technical mechanism that makes the most sense in certain circumstances, but mobility is what's desired, independent mobility specifically, right? And then the other aspect was natural communication. We like to joke that Steve wanted to argue with his wife, but really what that means is that having that natural back and forth between two humans, when you get one person who's so asymmetrically slow, it really slows things down and you miss out on the nuance that you can have as a human being, those connections. And so the ability to communicate naturally with his then one son Rivers and his wife and all that sort of stuff, that was really critical to us. So you notice here, eye gaze driving did ship, but you notice here that Microsoft's name isn't up here. And it's Evergreen Circuits, which is actually a small third-party company in this area that shipped it. But Steve's there, right? And so what does that mean? Well, shipping is hard, and hack to ship is super hard. And so I think one of the things to understand is that when you do things outside the norm of what your company does, it's really hard. And I think this whole COVID thing was interesting because people were like, oh, we should make Tesla make ventilators. Like, they make cars. And yes, certain things about what they do is similar to ventilators, but at the end of the day, they make cars. So all of a sudden going from a vehicle to medical equipment is actually a really big jump. And in the same sense, like, it's a heavy lift to say, hey, a company that makes primarily software and doesn't necessarily make a bunch of medical devices, hey, let's try to get into what could potentially be a very regulated field, right? I'm not a lawyer, I'm not making illegal statements here, but that's something that's a heavy lift. So it's going to be a really, long thing. But at the end of the day, our team is really taking this approach of ship by whatever means necessary. And what that ended up meaning is, we ship ideas, we ship open source samples of things. We did a study with Swedish Hospital that got published in Muscle and Nerve to try and start baselining that safe and effective. It was sort of a preclinical trial. And so I like this photo of the relay team here, because in many ways, I kind of feel like the dude on the left, like the guy on the right with the number 8 on his shirt, he looks happy. Like I'm pretty sure he's the dude that ran across the finish line in this case. Like, so he's happy. He's got the photo of him doing this across the finish line. But that first guy, he certain ways feels like me. Like I started the race, I did a bunch of the work, but my name doesn't always get to be associated with some of these big wins, and that's okay. Like, it's okay to have emotions about that, but you also have to understand that if you want to help real people, especially in the accessibility space, you've got to be willing to understand that there's times where you need to do work and there's times where you need to hand off in certain ways. And so, the fact that a local company was inspired by the great work and was able to, leverage a lot of the ideas that our team baselined and proved in various ways, and they were able to do that last little bit in cooperation with Team Gleason. That's great. In the end, I'm super ecstatic about it. That this little crazy whiteboard sketch is shipping, right? By hook or by crook, it's shipping. The other thing to remember is that it took years, right? This is not something that happens overnight. Hack to ship is a long process. And so don't think that it's just going to all of a sudden happen. So we shipped Windows eye control for Windows. And again, hack to ship is hard. Working across teams is challenging. Even when you're doing stuff that for the most part your company does, it can be really difficult. You really need to find advocates to work for you. Like we shopped around a whole bunch, and eventually we found this one team that was the right team. And we found the one person on that team who cared. And then we made them care even more. We got them to buy in, and then they advocated for us. And that's when things started to happen. One thing to understand is that, at first the concept of minimum viable product really felt gross to me, but at the end of the day, in today's world, shipping is not stopping. Shipping is a stop along the way. And so you have to sort of be willing to say, like, we're going to ship what we can right now. We're going to get it out there. We're going to prove that we can do something. And then we're going to keep going, because if you don't ship anything, eventually your budgets might get cut. And you got to know when it's time to step back. Like we handed off Windows Eye Control to, the central accessibility team, because our team is now working on other eye control related stuff. So we're still pushing forward on our goals, and I'm still influencing that other team, but I have to understand that my role is no longer typing the code to do certain things for that particular part of the project. My goal is to influence them on all the ideas that we weren't able to get, shipped. So there's this concept of inclusive design that we learned along the way. And so if you look at the left, there's sort of equality, right? Everybody gets the same affordances, and you can see people lose out, right? And then there's in the middle is sort of equity, where, some people get more stuff and others don't. And that's an okay approach. But when we think about inclusive design, if you look at, what it's sort of cut off, that small child, by having the chain link fence, their experience gets improved, but so does everybody else's experience, right? And that's, I think, the salient thing that inclusive design strives for. Is it's not about saying, these people get this thing, those people get that thing. It's saying, start with the hard problems, and then make sure that you take those hard problems and you make it so everybody can benefit. Curb cuts are a really good example, or automatic doors at grocery stores. Like they're there to help people with wheelchairs, but it turns out they also help people with carts and with luggage and things like that. So the other thing to remember is that there's users, right? And if you haven't met a user, it's not a real thing. Real users are complex, right? It's never just software when you're dealing with accessibility, because the software that you create is related to how they live their life. So it's more than just the person with a disability, because in this picture you've got all their caregivers as well. And it turns out terminal diseases suck. So we work with real people living with ALS. Our team's been around 5 years, and the average lifespan of somebody living with ALS is 2 to 5 years. So you can do the math, and it sucks. But at the same time, that makes the work all the more worth it. So the other thing we like to look at is, because of that, is this concept of extreme constraint design, which is basically saying, like, it's not just any one thing, it's all these other constraints put together that mean, like, hey, if I want to test a new speech system with Steve, he's got to be able to communicate, but he can't necessarily rely on the communication software that I'm trying to have him test, because then he can't speak. So how is he going to communicate feedback to me if the system that I'm trying to test is interrupting his communications mechanism? So there's a lot of really subtle things there. So, okay, that's cool. Like, this is all neat stuff. Good job, John. Why should I care, right? So to put it very briefly, we like to think of disability as permanent, temporary, and situational. So for touch, you've got like a person with one arm, right? Maybe they've got a congenital birth defect or lost it in an accident. You got an arm injury. Maybe you were doing a sweet trick on your one wheel and beefed it. Now you've got your arm in a sling. And then a new parent, or you've got an armful of groceries or delicious beverages that you might be carrying back to your place. These are all situations where you've got one arm, and so you need one-armed affordances. Like, how can you swipe right or swipe left on your phone only with one hand? But the other really important thing to try and convince you that disability is you, all of us, is aging is a polydisability. Aging is defined as a polydisability because as you get older, your mobility, your vision, your hearing, your cognition, all kinds of areas get affected. And so if we're all lucky enough to live long enough, we're all going to have a disability. And then kind of the last thing is this whole COVID thing has thrown the whole world up in arms. And now we're seeing these issues of, hey, great, we'll send everybody home. We'll have everybody be on Zoom. But it turns out that the people that needed special affordances still need those special affordances. You can't just say, oh, we'll deal with those later. Like, legally, you're required to provide those affordances. Some of you may even have affordances yourself via, 504s and IEPs and that sort of stuff. So this is all of us. So with that, we've got about 10 minutes left. So I'm happy to answer any questions. It's kind of a whirlwind tour. But I appreciate your attention.
Yeah, thanks, John. That was great. If anybody has questions, you can type in the chat box. That was really interesting. I learned a lot. Good.
And I've also unmuted, or if people want to give a conversation, I've unmuted everybody. Or
Okay.
just unmute
So if someone
yourself.
wants to speak, they can unmute and talk.
Hi, John.
Hey.
So one of my brother's good friends, he needs to use a screen reader now.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my questions is like, what are some good kind of like first steps to take to making kind of our software more accessible for something like a screen reader?
Right. So the most important thing is making sure that the platforms that you build as developers have accessibility affordances built in. So honestly, it's really difficult. Like you don't teach, WSU doesn't teach accessibility stuff at school. Like I'd love to see that happen, but pragmatically, it's probably not going to happen, unfortunately. And so one of the things to make sure of is that you need your platform that you're building, like .NET or Visual Studio. You need those tools to have the right affordances built in, right? So the controls can be read by a screen reader by default, right? So that's number one. Number two is that we really need accessibility issues to become build breaks. So right now, if you're lucky, you get a warning that says like, oh, bad things happened. But really what we need to say, no, this is a ship stopping issue, just like, a null dereference can be a ship stopping issue. So we really need to make sure that if a developer screws up accessibility, that it is a genuine breaking issue. And then the third thing is really just understanding what are the top 5 things that every developer needs to do. And so the great thing is that we have some tools that Microsoft has released that are accessibility checkers that go through, because there's things like making sure you have alt text on your images. The worst thing for screen readers is memes right now, because what you have is you have an image and then you have a bunch of text on top of the image that's not actual text. And so those are terrible for screen readers. So just understanding even the basics of some accessibility usually opens your eyes up enough to just sort of stop and think. This is an excellent question. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked, what are the top pieces of advice for new grads? So honestly, like number one, don't be so picky about your very first job. I've run into so many people that, you hate to use the word entitled, but there's so many people that are just like, well, I got this offer from insert awesome company here, but I don't like working on, whatever piece of technology because I really want to do this other thing. It's like, if it's a good job and they've got the infrastructure to train you, like, go take that job, get your 3 to 5 years of experience, because if you do that well, you can do anything you want in your career. So that's by far number one. Number two is take advantage of training opportunities in whatever situation you have. Like, don't just go there and be like, great, I know how to count toilet paper rolls, so that's just what I'm gonna do. Like, no, if you go to a big company and they have opportunities to like take a design patterns course or learn about accessibility or globalization, internationalization, any of these things that you didn't learn in school or you didn't, get as good of an understanding on, you take those opportunities and you run with it. And then the third thing is really embrace the extracurriculars at work, right? So whether it's a hackathon, whether it's like some of these special interest groups, like at Microsoft, we have a ton of aliases because it turns out there's, a bunch of single people with decent disposable incomes at various times. So we've got a thriving photography alias, a thriving makers alias, woodworkers, people who are into cars, people who are into knitting, all kinds of stuff. And so just getting into any of those communities has such a valuable networking opportunity where it's not that fake networking that I was talking about, but genuine like human connection. And those people are people that you'll be able to reach out with and like sort of spider out through the industry. So that's super, super useful. Let's see. If I'm using React libraries, Yeah, so there are definitely some libraries out there that can help with various types of accessibility stuff. And that's really the thing is when you choose your technology stack, make sure you choose something that has accessibility in mind. So other questions?
I have a question. So is there like a conglomeration or some like organization? Because like for like somebody who is generally not doesn't have a disability, I obviously don't really think about disabilities that much because I'm not impaired, or most of the applications I use have the functionality I need.
Sure.
So it's kind of tough for me to conceptualize what, like, having never used a screen reader or never having had to use a screen reader and maybe not even knowing that many disabled people.
Right.
It's kind of hard to envision what kind of features I need to have in my software or what kind of features that are even helpful there. So is there like, are there resources and conglomerations of knowledge on that?
There is. Let me see if I can find it real quick, and I'll pull it up on the screen in just a moment. So Microsoft has actually tried to answer this exact question. And so what we've done is we've put together externally some accessibility tools and videos that give you highlights around, like, you know, how do you do inclusive hiring? How do you do accessibility as a developer? Let's see if I can find out. Microsoft. So I searched for, I don't know if you can see that. So I searched for the Microsoft Accessibility Toolkit. And so there's this whole accessibility resources and guides. That's a great place to start. And the great thing about, like, everything related to this website, you know, accessibility in general at Microsoft, is that it goes over like how we think about accessibility. So I think this conceptualization here is super useful, like thinking about vision, hearing, neurodiversity, learning differences, mobility, mental health. And notice that we consider mental health to be in sort of a different bucket than neurodiversity. So that's super useful. There's a bunch of stories you can go through, what products have accessibility affordances, some different stories. So this site, Microsoft.com, basically whack accessibility, is a super useful tool for that. So that's where I would encourage you to start. That's an excellent question. Somebody's asking a couple ones about careers and internships and that sort of thing. So you want to start early, right? Like I said, like I applied my freshman year and I was okay with getting denied, but you know, every now and again we do hire awesome freshmen and we keep them all 4 years. You want to start early. By far, like when I was doing recruiting, the main time that we would do hiring for interns was in between your junior and senior year. And the main reason for that was because you've taken enough classes, you've gotten those first, second year classes out of the way and you're done. And especially since a lot of hiring happens in the fall of your junior year, you're just starting your junior year classes, you're just starting to differentiate, but you finally finished all those sophomore and freshman classes, all those baseline ones that a lot of people want for internships. So there's sort of this weird offset in terms of like, when we're trying to hire you, when you finish the classes that we need in order to feel like you're going to be successful in a position. And we've actually worked, you know, as a part of the EECS committee to try and say like, hey, are there adjustments that we can make either to the messaging towards industry or whatnot to try and better align that, because it is a sort of a chicken and egg problem. But yeah, most people between junior and senior year is the most prevalent time to get internships. By all means, apply all the time. And the other thing is, if you can do a off-cycle internship, either like in the fall or in the spring, sometimes that can be a really powerful thing. Universities like University of Waterloo, they build that into their infrastructure such that they say everybody gets internships. If you want to graduate, you get an internship. They help facilitate those, and they do them off-cycle, and that actually helps a lot in terms of the overall infrastructure. So I think I have time for one more question. Potentially.
Yeah, that sounds good. You want to do one more question and wrap it up, or we can wrap up now?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap up now. And if people have follow-ups, you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find, and that sort of thing. And you can find my profile on Microsoft Research. But yeah, thanks everybody for your questions and for your attention. Hopefully you found this useful, and then we can go from there.
All right.
I
Yeah.
come
Thank you,
around
John.
to say thanks, Greg and John. That was really, really awesome. Great job. Thank you.
To learn more about the Lunch and Learn with Industry webinar series, follow the link in the description, and we'll see you next time on Lunch and Learn with Industry.